Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Well, the further and further we get into this show, the deeper and deeper we're going to go, if only to try to stay cool. Because, well, if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more, enlightened in a conversational fashion. And, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. And if you are listening, keep listening and subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, give us the old 5-star rating on your podcast provider of choice. We're available pretty much everywhere, places like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would certainly appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram, the Letterboxd, the TikTok, the Threads, and probably a few others that I'm forgetting, at In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because guess what? If we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it even more when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please do us that kindness. Come on by and pay us a visit. Well, we're back in the depths of Silo, which is one of our favorite new shows over at Apple TV Plus. And if you don't already have Apple TV Plus, get on it, sign up for it, because damn, it really is some good stuff. It is a fantastic service, and we cannot recommend it highly enough. We're constantly there watching stuff, not just for work, but for the hell of it, because at the end of the day, we're fans too, right? But as we dive further into this show, and hope it wins all the awards over the Emmys for technical stuff, and we look at the visual effects side of Silo, and we have a unique pleasure sitting down with one of the VFX artists, the one and only Daniel Rauchwerger. I hope I pronounced that right. And we talk about the nature of the job and sort of world building and stuff like this, and just we had a really interesting talk about a really interesting show. And I know I say that a lot, but what the hell, it's true. But again, at the end of the day, I always like talking to these people who work behind the scenes on these fantastic shows that we love so much, because it takes a village to make so many of these beautiful, beautiful productions, and I cannot stress that enough. But like I said, if you want to go check out Silo, a little bit of dystopian sci-fi over on Apple TV Plus, I do recommend you go check that out. But first, enjoy our talk with Daniel Rauchwerger, one of the visual effects artists on the show, because, quite frankly, it's a darn good one. I mean, first off, obviously, just thank you for the time today, man. I appreciate this.
No problem at all.
Obviously, obviously, man, congrats on the show. I mean, it's fantastic. But I mean, I'm kind of curious, especially on something like this, and looking on your credits, because I've got to imagine when it comes down to visual effects, it's probably more about world building and sort of adding layers to what's already there, rather than sort of explosions or this or that or anything else. Like, can you talk to me a little bit about just not getting into a job like this and sort of what the intricacies are of what you have to do? Because especially on this show, it felt like it was more than just sort of maybe the obvious, more flashy things. It was definitely a bit more layered.
I think this was also the attraction of this show for me as a VFX artist. It was a slight different approach to how we use VFX. There's a lot of, the big, as you say, flashy, showy, in-your-face explosion. You always have those set pieces, and every show has those moments. But I think what really attracted me to this show was the idea of an opportunity of creating a world and really making it something that you forget about VFX. If it was almost became my purpose to make something that I can build this, what we identified as in the first season as a character in the show. We wanted the Silo to be just another character. There's something about the atmosphere and the feel of the space that always gives you a nice kind of canvas to work for the actors and for the performance. And it was something so different, the opportunity of doing something in a space that's mostly an open room. If you kind of think about Silo, it's a big one open plan space. And so there's always the continuity in how do you make a city feel alive and natural and organic without taking away from the story, but without also having it feel a bit like what I would call a stadium crowd, which is very
Right.
identifiable. Someone scored, everyone's happy. Someone didn't score, everyone's waiting, but and cheering. But this was more intricate, more detailed, and more kind of expensive to build and give us something different, which
Well,
really
no, I mean,
attracted
I'm
me.
curious because obviously something like this, I can imagine there are some sets you're having to sort of build out off of that. Like, what's the ratio of practical to VFX?
We had a lot of VFX shots. It was interesting because we had huge sets. It was the when you go into our set, and I remember the first time walking into it, the scope of the set was
Right.
ginormous. But it represented one floor. For example, for our main set, it represented one floor of 144 floors
Oh,
that we
wow.
had to almost move around and constantly make it different, make it something that you can still shoot in without having to rebuild the set for every floor in the silo. So we had to go heavier with VFX for certain elements that needed their own design, and we leaned heavier towards the blue screen. But even when you walked into the internal sets of the apartments, of the generator room, the void, everything was just big. By nature, the silo is huge, and we had to expand on that. So it was something that was just creating that scope and creating those sets. And then you land into certain areas when the sets needed to be so big, but still have actors interact with them, that we had to split how we shoot it into three different sections. So, for example, in our generator room, we had the control room, and you have someone running from the control room and shouting instructions to someone that's sitting on an entirely different set that was shot on an entirely different day. And they're interacting between them, they're talking, and we had to do those things in a way that can play with the set, which meant we weren't able to use things like motion control and things that are more controllable, because our director wanted to go and be very handheld and feel quite the energy of the sequence needed to be a bit more free, which required a bit more planning.
Hmm.
And it was, yeah, it's a very different kind of approach to it. It's got, you feel like I need to make it bigger, but at the same time the sets were huge. So we had, I would say, every set needed blue screen extension and building of crowd. Some sequences it was just a very minimal extension. We tried to kind of keep a little bit of it as real as possible, but when we drifted further into the amount of camera moves and the amount of flexibility that we needed in order to tell the story, it became quite apparent we'll have to use a lot more VFX than what appears to be there on the screen.
For sure, for sure. No, I mean, I'm curious. I mean, obviously, on a show like this, it feels like they probably brought you in pretty early on. But I mean, I can imagine in the VFX world, it varies from job to job. But I mean, on this, like, were you sort of in there from the early stages, or was this something that you were there sort of after the fact?
No, we were there from very early on. We joined the show before the sets were even built, so we could really plan and determine how the methodologies are going to work. The show is it's a bit like a mathematical formula that you had to solve, because it always rotates. The spiral staircase introduce a new complexity in set extensions that the more you think about it, the more planning is required in order to get eye lines to match, in order to have people move properly from one section of the set to the other. The bridges repeat every 120 degrees. It became this complex, basically kind of strategic map that we had to build of how we approach every sequence and every shot. Um, so we joined in quite early on to help and kind of work with production design and the director to build it.
Now, I've got to imagine that's a big bonus. But I mean, it's also it's because obviously you're world building, and I mean, this is something that's never been seen before. But on the other end, I'm kind of curious about when you're having to make effects sort of in more of a real world situation or things that have maybe historical or already happened. Because I mean, I'm a big fan of the Chinese film, The 800, which you worked on, and I love just sort of the action and the effects in there. But is the job different when you have to sort of build out from things that maybe have already existed versus when you get to sort of build from the ground up?
It differs. There's a lot of things that I took from my experience on a show like 800 to how you build a city and how you create those textures, because there's a lot of things that need to be the same in order to really sell it and in order to make it feel like people actually live there. It does differ in a way that you get a bit more flexibility, but at the same time, there's a lot more things that kind of help that you have to do when you have an historical movie. You can kind of go and go, those things are what I need to tackle in order to kind of keep the suspense of disbelief, make it feel a bit more natural. Those things are familiar, but those things are maybe far enough in the past that you can kind of build on them and have it not draw attention to itself. But yet here we had a bit of a new world, which we had to find ways of putting those details that are not necessarily as easy to place as, shop fronts and how people climb onto a tram and do those kind of things, which I've done on that on 800. When here you suddenly have to work with bringing those stories to the balconies of the silo. How do we place them? How do we still maintain that feeling of a natural place, which you have more flexibility in some ways because you're designing a completely new world and it's an unfamiliar environment. But at the same time, because of I found that because of the cylindrical kind of shape and the repetition in the shape, we had to find very creative solutions in how to break that feeling of repetition in shapes and form, because we are basically in one very, very long cylinder
Right.
throughout. So, yeah,
Now, I
slightly.
mean, I'm curious because it feels like, especially in your job, and I mean, particularly on something like Silo, I've got to imagine the creative payoff is almost when you have a shot that nobody notices where the VFX are, as opposed to something that's maybe a bit more obvious and in your face. Like at the end of the day, what is the creative payoff for you in a job like this?
Invisibility is to me
Mm.
is the greatest creative payoff. I mean, I find it these days everyone's talking about, pros and cons of using VFX and CGI, and there's always this conversation of uh, do you only judge CGI based on badly executed work or things that are trying to be so showy that you just don't believe them anymore? When I look at so many projects that have perfect invisible visual effects and you just don't think about it. There's amazing movies and projects that get away with showing insane VFX right in your face and you don't notice it and people just go, they did it practically because they can afford to say they did it practically. And I think that is to me the magic of the job, being invisible, being someone that if people watch the show and go, "Oh, what did you do for visual effects?" I feel like I won. If someone says, "Oh, I love that moment in the show and it's so great they did it practically," and I know we didn't. Perfect. That's even better. It means I did my job well, and I get to we get to support a story rather than become the center of the sort of story. I think a lot of people in visual effects like to be the behind the scenes people, kind of slightly hidden, like a good magician, rather than being in the spotlight, being told, "Hey, look, there's a big explosion." That's less of the attraction. It's more about the creation of something that people just accept and enjoy the story.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine it cuts both ways because I mean, at the end of the day, we all know that, they didn't send a Honda into space in the Fast Nine kind of thing, but it's still fun to watch. But seeing sort of the crowds in Silo and the crowds and stuff filmed like 800 or Bohemian that you worked on, it's one of those things that it's an artistry that at least from my perspective, never gets enough love. But I mean, I'm always kind of curious what ultimately got you into the VFX side of things? Like, was there a moment in your life or a movie or something that you're like, I want to do that side, I want to work on that side of the business?
It's funny because we say to me it was always this attraction to the magic of movies. You always look at something and I used to, even before I got into the industry, years before when I was a kid, I remember those pictures from a movie set when you see a scene you're so familiar with, and then you just see a wide shot showing camera crew and boom mics and all this equipment, and then you see just the back of a plywood facade, and you go, "Oh, that whole city, that whole town in Back to the Future, Indiana Jones, that whole thing was just it was a fake, but it
Yeah.
was so convincing that to me that was this kind of magic of creating movies." And when I started learning about visual effects and about the ability to expand beyond that and do something that was just, you know, beautiful and invisible, but at the same time create something impossible. It was always attractive to me. And I remember watching 2001 and how they made those,
So,
you know, spinning hallways and I just remember seeing the solutions that were practical, but it immediately made me kind of go, wow, there's so many things you can do as the illusion and this how can I solve a problem and make it look just fantastic? And it doesn't necessarily mean compositing it on the computer, but also the idea of taking a camera, hooking it up to something, cheating, adding just one layer that creates this illusion, that pan in the on the on the on the spaceship. It's just those kind of moments attracted me into this creation and to do something slightly different.
well, I love that, man. But I mean, honestly, Daniel, just keep up the good work. Keep up making the magic. And I mean, again, Silo is just a fantastic show that I absolutely love. I get totally immersed in it from the minute one. And I mean, your work is a big part of that. But I mean, just again, my friend, thank you for the work and thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate this.
Brilliant. Thank you.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.